stage or like what? I have to sit down.
It's a
here.
whiteboard.
Oh,
It's just a whiteboard.
it's a whiteboard.
Oh, whiteboard. Oh,
Yeah.
It's a discovery place. So
Yeah.
we can discover.
All right. Thank you so much, everyone, for everybody. We have today two wonderful guests. Raphael, our artist director for our production of Mythology Fair, and our very own Dr. Raphael. Get started here. Dr. Raphael, you could just tell us, where did you first encounter Ben Jonson? And what do you know about this guy?
Well, I first encountered only a bit. Only a
You
bit.
were best friends in
He was a
college,
young fella.
right?
He was a bricklayer's son. I didn't really have much to do with him. He drank too much. He had a bad complexion. But I was in a production of Art Fair as a senior in my last semester. I had the starring role of Northern, which is so small a part that it was cut and should have been. I wished it had been at the time. I had no idea what the play was about. It was the professor who was the head of, we didn't have a theater department at Dartmouth because it was still part of English. But he was our theater professor. He went on to Cornell for a while. He had an idea that that play would be popular at a male school in the middle of winter, and particularly if at the end, when Justice Overdue invites everybody to their house, if there's no way for the audience who came in to exit where they came in, but had to go over the stage, where something very like this opened up and there was a keg. And so we had a party. So Shakespeare. I was always telling the audience how good he was. He was always made all of his plays moral. It was a big thing for him. I mean, he actually wrote about that later. In this play, it's totally relaxed. It's totally, the play is going to be fun, and boy, oh boy, does this production do it. And additionally, he makes much fun of himself in this play, though he does get a jab into Shakespeare. So it just was special. And it all took place in one place, which is part of what my dissertation turned out to be, because I noticed that after the first three plays, we tried to gather everything in a really small space. And we've done that particularly well in the Alchemist, where it never goes anywhere. except for the room that it's in. But you kind of loosen things up, and the fair it all takes place in Smithfield, a very, very short distance from Little Woods House. Those are the two settings. So he seemed to think that that would help something, and I think what it helps is the fact that people can run into each other all the time, and you're not surprised. But I love the play, and I really kind of figured out what it's about. Then I saw, and I'm saying this as a lead-in, and then I saw 5 productions over my lifetime. People producers don't really bet on this play. And I saw a pretty good one at the Young did, about 35 years ago. And I thought I was one of those series. And none of them were as good as the play out there. Until I saw the Streetlight production. And I'm not making that up. That second half was exactly where everything sort of comes together in a momentary line. In a way, very much like Pyramids of Disney at the end of the screen, where the puppet show is the thing that ends the play, just as Pyramids of Disney does, and we're all back and happy with it. We did that, and I'll just share this. It'll always be one of my favorite memories, but partly because on a Sunday night, you had a pretty good crowd. Something about maybe almost 100 people, but at least 70, 75 people. It was a good crowd for on a Sunday night. And then I noticed that there was this guy in the audience that I recognized. Well, of course, I recognized the president of college and some other friends, but I recognized Adam Schiff, Citizen, had come with his wife to the bandstand, and on a Sunday night, they were seeing a play hardly anyone gets to see by a bunch of graduate students having a really good time. And that was great, and I asked him at anyway, how he heard about us, and he heard about us and had come down, and he was so surprised by what a great city this was. It was great. So I had that pleasure. I had the pleasure of seeing them grow happier and happier. That's my experience of this.
So Raphael, have you ever encountered Johnson in either an academic or in a play or throughout the setting before coming and this sort of thing? Also, what was your first reaction when you were there?
My first reaction was kind of like, wow, what is this? What is happening? The only Johnson that I encountered was in grad school, and that was Raphael. And it was, I was in a course called Shakespeare's Contemporaries, where we just read some of the other playwrights from the period alongside Shakespeare's play, and we did compare and contrast. We did that in a whole bunch of plays and a bunch of different playwrights over the course of the semester. And Volpone was one of the plays that we covered, but that was 10 years ago, and I haven't encountered Johnson since that. Genuinely my first impression, I hesitate because I don't know if I should say this. I was actually considering what I could say to Doreen to convince the graduate students to pick a different I never got there. We never had that conversation. Because I said, okay, let me just play it out, see how it all goes. But at full length, it's just massive. It's a 5-hour play, uncut, or close to it, and reading it on the page, it's really hard to follow. So makes no sense at all. And it was really probably about a week and a half into rehearsal, like once we got through the first stages of blocking, and once the dramaturgs cut half the play, that I found myself saying, oh, okay, I know what's going on. Like I'm starting to get the story, but it really took getting into the process and actually hearing it out loud, which made all the difference in the world. That was what actually invited my understanding more so than reading it on the page.
So I am happy with
No, I was going to call. I was going to start my
So
question.
you go ahead.
So, you start.
Thank you. I was like looking for a chair and I was like, you're sitting last time. Come back here.
I'm going to start sort of where you did what one, because I think it might be interesting to our students that Raphael was at Exeter, which was when we started this program. We thought that they were the only other school that dealt with, Shakespeare in particular, was dealt with acting and performance, and direct to the head coaches and direct. We wanted to do that with teaching. And so I'm very conscious when a kid would choose us over Exeter, and it was usually because they couldn't afford us or something like that. But also know, there's some wonderful kids that we lost to Exeter. So I wanted to ask you, for them, if you would just say a little bit about that program, and maybe sort of the course that you most enjoyed there that you think we all enjoyed. Of course, almost a topic that you would say, well, maybe you would this suggestion.
Bad thing about the second part of that. So I found University of Exeter because at that point, I had spent 10 years as a professional actor. And I wanted to, and I had been an educator already on the elementary and high school level. And I was just getting into directing. And I wanted more of just a foundation to my artistry. And I didn't want to go to an acting conservatory because I had already been doing that. I did look at other specifically directing programs and consider those as well. But the other thing that was in my mind is I had never been out of the country, and it seemed like a nice excuse to travel abroad. So as I was looking at schools, I literally just stumbled across this staging Shakespeare is what the program was. And then I read, I just kept reading on it, and I did my research, and it seemed like exactly what I was looking for. I wanted to get into higher education, and this provided an MFA. It allowed me to not just go in and focus on acting, which I felt like I really had a good handle on already, but to study theater kind of from a different angle, and it gave me opportunities. If I wanted to act, if I wanted to direct, I could direct, and there were even some education opportunities along the way as well. So it was such a, what it was offering was so well-rounded, and I'm someone who I've always done everything, and I didn't want to change that. I wanted to keep doing all the things that I do because I enjoy all aspects of it. And so it was really attractive to me what that program was offering, which is how I ended up there. I've never been out of the country, and the first week they had lost my luggage, so on my way. So same clothes for a week. I washed them in the sink.
Hurries to say.
It was pretty harrowing the first couple of weeks, but then everything got straightened out and ironed out, and I really had a blast the whole time. In terms of something that that program did that really stood out to me is we had an opportunity each year to do a 2-week residency at the Globe in London. It was during the winter, so they were dark for their regular season, and that's when they opened it up for schools to come in. But I got to work on that stage with Globe professionals on acting, on movement, on voice, and we did a showcase at the end of the 2 weeks, both years. And being able to be on that stage and when the whole space was empty and to feel how the language functions in that space was really enlightening in terms of understanding how the text wants to work, because it's made for a space that's built like that. Actually, I had a similar experience when we put Raphael in the Blackfriars. It seemed to fit that type of space, and I could tell that the two kind of go hand in hand. But the architecture was so interesting to me, like the way the sound travels. Like people seem like they're really far away, but you can almost hear a whisper, even from the top row of seats from the stage. Yeah, the Globe. And just the way the acoustics function and how the language really comes alive on stage. And then, we learned about Elizabethan staging practices with the 2 pillars in the middle and how they would kind of navigate that and how that related to language in the text, the entrances and exits and things like that. So that experience, being able to work with Globe professionals and being able to be on that stage was a really unique and valuable experience for my education.
Right. So, our program should now offer that to us, right?
Maybe for it, probably.
It gets warmer.
Yeah, we were on stage with coats, so I will say that. But there was a cool time where it started. It doesn't snow much there at all, but one day we were on the stage and it started snow flurries, and all of a sudden we were in a snow globe. It was quite magical.
Yeah.
I have one kind of obvious question, but I was just, this is again, my own curiosity about Exeter and experience of that. The kind of cliche idea that there are this British and American approach to the language that interactive. Did you find that? Dichotomy at all?
So, fun fact, the majority of my particular cohort was mostly American students.
Okay.
What's the difference?
So the majority of us were from the States, and also my particular cohort, if they weren't from, we did have some UK students, but we had a student from India, we had a student from Austria, we had a student from Shanghai, China. So my particular cohort, there were only 3 or 4 British students. In seeing the shows that I was able to see over the course of 2 years, I don't know much about the approach, but there's, I would say it's different. I just don't know if I can articulate how. It's much more. I would say it's probably a little bit, other than this program, a little bit more grounded in the language than the way Shakespeare is done in America, or a lot more grounded in the language than the way Shakespeare is done.
I think I'm referring to that outside in and inside out, where, you know, create the character from the outside. This is a cliche, and I'm starting by saying it's dubious. It's a dubious cliche because it's a total simplification, but that British acting training is going to be much more about you create the character with your voice and then you become the character. And you know, as opposed to the method and the things that you associate with, and, you know, it's in you, and then you go ahead and do that.
Yeah, I think the focus of my program was more on how the historical context affects the language. We had acting classes, but sometimes we always were in specific things. Like I had a legal course while I was there. So if we had an acting class, it was a particular discipline. But in terms of overall philosophy, because the program was more focused on Shakespeare than it was necessarily how to perform, I don't know if I got that particular experience of outside in versus inside out. I will say they are much more focused on process than product, as opposed to the United States, where it's a lot of times it's about the bottom line. Get a student on his feet, open a night is in a couple of weeks. They almost didn't care about that. It was more about what did you learn throughout this process, which I really appreciated, to not have the pressure of what does the performance look like. That's not what their focus was. It was more what was your process and what were you exploring, which I've taken from that kind of into my directing work. I know that I have to be mindful of the final product, but I approach it from a standpoint of exploration and discovery.
We have a lot of time. I could look at that. It's really a long. Okay, thank you. I'm going to the Raphael biography from school to the places you work.
Sure.
And it's interesting to me that you worked at the largest Shakespeare company in USA, at a sort of medium-sized and very successful one with Shakespeare Ensemble. But you've also worked with non-Shakespeare, and you've also directed for Starlight.
Yes.
And I mention those in particular because Elm was started by, or taken over by, a former student, and and because, of course, Streetlight was started by two students, and was really smart. And that's just, first of all, I'll show remember and proud of that. That's real cool. But partly, I was hoping that this program would produce a lot of those comments. But I wanted your sort of overall take on the benefits of a small versus a large company, and vice versa. What, for you, you're just watching, directing a one, obviously, what you see about that, and any observation you want to make, having looked at a giant situation and with sorrow.
Yeah, I think what I appreciate about small scale, particularly when it comes to Shakespeare, is that you can really focus on the language of the story, which large companies aren't always necessarily interested sometimes it's like you have so much money you don't know what to do with it. And so, it becomes a huge spectacle of costumes and lights and sound. And in those kind of situations, the story can get lost. And with small scale, you have to pay attention to the story that you're telling, because that's going to be the foundation of what you do, because you're keeping everything else at the minimum. So I really appreciate that about small scale. As a matter of fact, I'm going back to start this summer to direct now. I'm very excited to work with Jesse Lillis. So what I found when I went to OSF was that it is still just theater. I had an impression, I grew up on the East Coast, and OSF is like on Mount Olympus when it comes to Shakespeare, right? It's like top of the line. And there was wonderful work being produced out there, but when I got out there and started working, heading out there was a kind of an intimidation just from the sheer size of it. And I got out there and I was like, oh, this is what I've been doing my whole life. It's not really different. They just have a lot more money and 3 theaters to produce shows at. But it's the biggest takeaway is that it's all the same. Like it's still storytelling.
So they didn't have too much.
That we could debate that. I have opinions about that.
One of the most amazing things I've seen, I found out about Ron later. Ron Road from the music professor. He started doing it. And it was that I took a bunch of kids from disadvantaged to see the temples. And they were, and went in, and it was a good production. It had a very famous way of acting. It was not Gilbert, because it was guy who was, but it was a famous guy who played a lot of so that was a real, so they were making a lot of money. And then it had this giant anchor. It was in the big house. I thought he was sure that built a small house. That the other place. But a giant anchor, sort of suspended from